we're done. And I'm not a scientist. The complexity of the human body is so complex. Given 5 billion years, if we were here, do you really believe that evolution, the Big Bang, and the degree with which the universe revolves could just happen? Do you really believe that?
I've noticed there's a big tendency lately, it's called the fine-tuning argument, to impress me, or to try and impress me by saying, look how nearly nothing happened at all. Look how nearly it was all a complete failure. I've failed completely to see the force of this argument, either scientifically or by analogy. Here's the situation. Edwin Hubble, as you know, discovered that the effect of the Big Bang was that the universe was exploding away from itself at a faster rate than had been thought. But it was going very quickly indeed. It's called the red light shift. Most people thought that if only for Newtonian reasons that would go on, but the rate of expansion would slow. It just couldn't possibly keep going that fast. Lawrence Krauss and other very distinguished physicists have shown relatively recently the rate of expansion is going up. It's burning away from itself faster than it was before. So very, very soon you won't even be able to see from the red light shift what the evidence of the original Big Bang was. We were lucky to catch it while we could. It's going. And in the meantime, so a lot of wherever the something came from, there's a huge amount of nothingness headed our way at warp speed. And in the meantime, if you want a smaller example, just look at the night sky where you could now see the Andromeda Galaxy almost without a telescope, headed directly on collision course for us. That's coming. Who knows which will happen first? A lot of nothingness. A lot of nothing. No, a lot of not. Well, look, where's if all this? You've got all this somethingness. I'm going to have to tell my Navy story now.
But wait, how does this?
It's directly relevant now.
You can tell that in your closing statement.
How does this refute the fine-tuning argument? Since the cosmological constant, which drives the acceleration of the expansion of the universe, has to be fine-tuned to 1 part out of 10 to the 120th power in order for us to exist.
Then let's take an even smaller case. I mean, I was doing just the suburban one of the Andromeda Galaxy that's headed for us. Take our own just tiny little village, the solar system. Of all the other planets in the system, all of them are lifeless, except our own. Either because they're much too bloody hot, or much too bloody cold. And that's true of large tracts of our own planet as well, which are on a climatic knife edge, as we have good reason to know from studying more and more, and threatens us with extinction relatively swiftly. And if we were to become extinct, all we would be doing, well, not all, but one of the things we'd be doing would be joining the 98.9% of all species ever created on Earth that have already become extinct, as we very nearly did in our very early days in Africa. So, some design, and some tuning. It's basically an extinction racket, a huge lottery in which most people and most things lose, and in which we are fated and slated to do so. So, since you're, it seems to me that simply expressing continual thanks and gratitude for this, and retrospectively conferring baptism on the people who died before they knew that we were all going to go extinct, is nullity defined.
Okay. Thank you all for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for more. Now it's time for our closing statements. We're running a little bit behind, so I'd ask each of you to take 3 minutes to sum up for us and leave us with something to chew on. We'll start this time in this order. We'll start with Jim and work our way down that way. So go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Stan, and thank you, each of you, for joining our conversation today. I am especially grateful for Lee. He and I have been friends for years, and I'm so grateful for his work and ministry. And I have watched Dr. Wilson and Dr. Craig with great gratitude and have profited from what they have done. I have enjoyed immensely my reading of Christopher Hitchens prior to his writings on religion, and have found him today to be exactly what I expected. I expected him to have humor. I expected him to be insightful and bright and brilliant, and it has been an honor to do this with you, Christopher. Thank you. And
very good.
you as well. 3 points I would make by way of closing that seem to me to be part of the issue that has been discussed for 2 hours as we have looked at the reality and the relevance of the God of Christianity. First has to do with the uniqueness of the atonement. It continues to bother so many people that Christianity would claim that Jesus is uniquely the way to God and that his death 2,000 years ago is uniquely our hope. My mother suffered from colon cancer a number of years ago. There was one particular chemotherapy that saved her life. We were not frustrated that we didn't have 29 options. We were grateful for the one chemotherapy that was effective in combating the disease that would otherwise have killed her. Jesus is the only person ever to have died on the cross to pay for our sin. The only person ever to take our place. That offer is available to all of the human race. It's not a problem to have only one key as long as that key opens the lock. It's not a problem to have only one road as long as it leads all the way home. The uniqueness of the atonement is that God loves us and has made possible His love for us through Christ. A second point I would want to make returns to the distinction between Christianity and religion. Again and again today for these 2 hours we have discussed the problems and struggles of world religions, and I continue to want to say Christianity is not religion, it is relationship. And to condemn Christianity because of the excesses of other religions is simply patently unfair to the Christian faith. My last point that I would make would be, and I was fascinated to hear this before, that Christopher had said that he did not understand really what it could be that would persuade him against his atheism or away from his atheism. Anthony Flew years ago made an argument against Christianity that it was not falsifiable. That in fact no argument could count against Christianity, which made it meaningless speech. Anthony Flew has since become a theist, which is a fascinating step that we all hope Christopher will take as well. In the course of the conversation, I would want to make the point out of 1 Corinthians 15, and it returns to Christopher's original opening statement. If someone could in fact prove to us that they had in their possession the corpse of Jesus Christ, Christianity would be false. The Bible says that if Christ be not raised from the dead, we are of all men most to be pitied. I believe atheism is non-falsifiable. Christianity is falsifiable relative to resurrection. It is demonstrated by the reality of the resurrection. My last point would have to do with, again, the meaning and the significance of this personal relationship. Yesterday I was part of a service, a memorial service, for a 98-year-old member of our church who had lived a remarkable and distinguished life. From there, my wife and I went to the hospital where we waited for one of my dearest friends in the world to come and tell us that his wife had completed the childbirth process for a baby who was 19 weeks old and would not survive. And when he came to tell us that their child, Charlie, had been born at 2:17 yesterday, and we could go back and we could see him and we could be with them, and now we're planning a memorial service in a few days. I can tell you that if that father and mother were here today, they would tell you that their faith in Jesus Christ is the only hope they have, and the ultimate hope they have, and the meaning that they find in such a chaotic and fallen world as this. And I am so grateful they have that hope, and I would want to offer that hope to all who are willing to consider the claims of Christ today.
Thank you. Lee?
I have to say I share this gentleman's frustration a bit because, and I share it not only in terms of today's discussion, but also in terms of reading books by Christopher, or his book, God is Not Great, and some other books by some militant atheists recently that, you know, we just kind of refuse to deal with the kind of affirmative arguments for the existence of God. We refuse to wrestle with those, refuse to respond to those, and instead kind of, you know, it reminds me of a court of law. You know, the trial lawyers will say, you know, if you got the law on your side, you know, then argue that. If you've got the facts on your side, argue that. Otherwise, argue the opposite. Well, he doesn't have the facts on his side in terms of the evidence that points toward the existence of God. And so we kind of have focused a lot on various permutations of the pain and suffering issue in various ways, for which there is a theistic and a Christian response that's been articulated, and I think makes sense. So, you know, I would encourage some further discussion at some point about these arguments that stand unrefuted. I mean, the fact that they, you know, Christopher said a minute ago, he said there's not a rag of truth to Christianity. Well, that's a statement, an opinion. That's not an argument. That's not evidence that points to something. And, you know, I would challenge anybody to transcribe his response to the fine-tuning thing and read it on paper and see if that makes one shred of sense. In terms of answering the ultimate question of the fine-tuning of the universe. You talk about dysteleology, and we can get into that. There are answers for that sort of thing. So I think my frustration is, as someone who had been an atheist, and being persuaded that the Christian case is a better explanation of the universe and our life, to hear some, at some point, writing a discussion really wrestling with these classical and I think evolving in terms of getting sharper with the fine-tuning argument and cosmology, increasingly potent arguments for the existence of God.
Thank you, Lee. Doug?
I thought of one thing in this last question about the complexity of the human body. If you want to be a non-believer,